When petroleum, the word derived from the Greek words for stone and oil, is derived from ancient organisms, the organisms in question are far smaller and less glamorous than dinosaurs, microscopic ocean-dwelling plants and animals known as algae and zooplankton. When these organisms die, they rain down onto the ocean floor, gradually piling up in thick layers. These deposits of organic matter are then covered over with layers of silt, pushing them ever deeper beneath the surface. Over millions of years, the silt layers build up to a kilometer or more in thickness, slowly solidifying into sedimentary rock such as shale. The immense pressure of this rock pressing down upon the remains of the plankton and algae creates the ideal conditions for converting these remains into petroleum. The first step in this process occurs until the remains are 10 meters below the surface and involves the decomposition of the plankton and algae by anaerobic bacteria, which do not require oxygen to survive. These bacteria break down sulfates and nitrates in the organism's bodies into hydrogen sulfide and nitrogen and polysaccharides and proteins into simple sugars and amino acids, and eventually strip the remains of most of their nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus, leaving behind mostly carbon and hydrogen. Past 10 meters in depth, the heat and pressure exerted by the overlying rock layers kill the bacteria and halts decomposition. Now begins the next stage of petroleum formation, the recombination of the simple hydrocarbons produced by the bacteria into a solid wax-like substance known as kerogen. This process continues until a depth of around 1 kilometer, below which the third step can begin, the conversion of kerogen into petroleum. This process is highly sensitive to temperature and can only occur within a narrow range known as the oil window. Below the window, the hydrocarbons remain trapped as kerogens, while above the window, the heat and pressure decompose the kerogens into lighter hydrocarbons like methane, creating natural gas. To be easily accessible and extractable, petroleum and natural gas must be expelled from the source rock where it was formed and accumulate in a reservoir. A typical reservoir or trap consists of a layer of permeable stone covered in a layer of impermeable caprock like sandstone or salt, which traps the oil and gas and prevents it from reaching the surface.
Now, what was the point of that video? The point is that 74% of us believe that any dead organic matter forms oil, while only 6% of us chose the right answer, which is small dead sea organisms. When I was a kid, I was taught in school that dinosaurs that got trapped into tar pits and died there eventually became oil. I lived most of my life believing that oil came from dinosaurs. Just like 14% of the people on that poll that I put up a few days ago, 10 days ago. Then after the whole dinosaur theory got smacked out of my head by watching some TV show, it changed to trees. And recently, it changed to small, dead sea organisms. What's the answer going to be in like 3 to 5 years? 10 years? Who knows? But my point is, none of us really know anything. None of us can claim to know anything. Everything is always changing. Science is changing. Ethics are changing. The definition of what is a woman or what is a man is changing. Whereas 20 years ago, the answer to that was crystal clear. You could just go out and point and say, yeah, that's a woman. Or yeah, that's a man. But if you ask somebody in government, you ask a judge or whatever, the definition of these things, they're going to take like 6 months to a year before they get back to you with an answer. I say that to say nobody really knows anything. We have a good idea in most cases. We have a good idea about what's what. And some of us, like our boy Tyra, has nothing but bad ideas and believes that he absolutely knows everything. Let's take a look at this.
It's just not. It's procedure. It's just not clear enough to make an outright arrest on it tonight.
Yeah, I figured that.
I would caution you about running up on people in alleyways with a machete. Though.
For what reason?
It just looks bad. And if we can't,
Hold up, such as?
and if we can't prove that he did something wrong, then where does the liability fall? You know what I'm saying?
I got the
I'm
footage.
Just, I'm just looking out for you, man.
Listen, I understand the law. I know the law. What I did, I can do. I did it when they was breaking in my neighbor's house, so I got them on camera. Now, whether they didn't took camera footage from my shit and enhanced it and got it clear. So I'm not worried about that. Exactly what I said happened. And you just doing your job.
Yeah.
I'm frustrated, so if my voice raises in anger, it's not directed towards you. Let me make that clear before I continue to talk.
What are y'all
Okay?
saying?
No, I just cautioned him about running up on guys in an alleyway with a machete. That's all.
That conversation right there is a great example of why Indianapolis is the way it is currently. They should have corrected him immediately instead of letting him run around with the idea in his head that he is anywhere near correct in this matter. He believes he can run up on people. He can be the law. He can be a vigilante in his own state, in his neighborhood, without repercussions. And as of yet, has had zero repercussions. IMPD lets him believe this. They should have corrected him. They should have stopped him. They should have arrested him that night for kidnapping that homeless man. But he's going to continue to do things like this until he's corrected. Let's talk about what he was talking about today. The castle doctrine.
I'm going to show you it's clear that a lot of these public officials in the state of Indiana have no idea what the law is. So therefore, they probably need to either go back and learn the law or just remove themselves from a public position. Because to trump up charges against people is beyond me. All right? And y'all know what I'm talking about. This is a state policy to recognize the unique character of a citizen's home and to ensure that a citizen feels secure in his or her own home against unlawful intrusion by another individual public servant. Now, the situation is this. You had bounty hunters who actually had no business being in my house. Fact number one. Fact number two, they claimed that I was the signer of the bond. Fact number three, I was not the signer of the bond. I had nothing to do with the bond. They had no business at my home. But you have trolls who actually called and lied to the bail bondsman, and by the bail bondsman losing his own paperwork, right? He didn't know who was the signer on the bond, so he believed the troll and sent bounty hunters to my home, and they made a threat. They made a threat to forcefully enter my property without a warrant. And I subsequently told them what I would do if they entered my property without a warrant, which I have a right to do, as you will learn.
What Tyra still doesn't understand is that you don't have to be a big Hawaiian dude with a mullet to knock on somebody's door. Anybody can come and knock on anybody's door. It doesn't matter. It is not against the law to knock on someone's door and try and talk to them. Those bounty hunters could have went 10 miles away, 10 blocks away, could have went next door. They could have went anywhere. They could have gone 10 states away and knocked on anyone's door and asked them if they had seen Helen. The fact that they were knocking on Tyra's door makes more sense. One, because he allegedly put money towards the bond. Two, that's his mother. Three, she's been there before in that house. It makes complete and total sense why a bounty hunter who's looking for her while she's on the run would knock on his door. Forget any tips. Forget any paperwork of who signed what. If you're looking for someone who's on the run, the first thing you do is check their friends and family. Tyra would qualify. Any other arguments he has about that are completely irrelevant. Now, let's talk about his defense. He's already said that he was not home when the bounty hunters showed up. He arrived after they had already left, and he says that he was defending his home when he made what the state of Indiana calls felony intimidation threats. And adding the gun to it, it became with the intent to commit a forcible felony. He believes that he was totally in the right by this, and no one has told him different yet. Let's take a look as to why he is completely wrong and misunderstanding the castle doctrine that the legal genius says he knows all about.
Keep them lights up. I would greatly appreciate it and thank you in advance. Did the bounty hunter specifically make a threat towards you, to my wife, towards my wife, and my property? Yes, they did. I wasn't here. I wasn't here.
Castle doctrine. It may change when you can use deadly force. How does it do that? If certain triggering criteria are met, it creates a presumption that you are in reasonable fear of imminent death or great bodily harm, or however your state articulates a deadly force law. Bottom line meaning, if certain criteria are met, you are now presumed lawful to use deadly force. But a presumption of lawful use of deadly force does not mean that it's a license to kill. Let's take a look at this video to find out why. Today we're going to be talking about castle doctrine, and we're going to be trying to do this really quickly to give you kind of a quick crash course. First, we have to start with a brief recap of deadly force law. Remember, we can only shoot or use deadly force to stop a deadly threat. That's the general gist to this, all right? So what does castle doctrine actually do? Castle doctrine creates a presumption where if certain triggering criteria occur, we can now presume that we are in reasonable fear of imminent death or great bodily harm. So in other words, if something happens, like someone's breaking into my home, my dwelling, we're going to get to that, but if someone breaks into my home, I don't have to wait for them to be standing over me with a knife while screaming they're going to kill me for me to use deadly force. It creates a presumption that if somebody breaks into my home at 2 a.m., I don't have to wait to see some sort of weapon for them to declare a deadly threat or to, so to speak, for them to make the first move. There's a presumption that if you break into my home at 2 a.m., you are a deadly threat and I can use deadly force. Now, when you hear that P word, presumption, there's an R word that follows it, rebuttable. What am I talking about? If that person starts to run away, to retreat, to fall back, we have to let them go. That is rebuttable evidence that they are no longer a deadly threat. So remember, castle doctrine, just like stand your ground or frankly any of these other self-defense laws, none of these are a license to kill. These are about shooting to stop the threat or using deadly force to confront deadly force. But here with castle doctrine, it gives you an entitlement. It gives you a presumption in your favor if certain criteria are met.
See, I was in my own home. I'm not a criminal. I was in my own home. People came to my home, made a threat, a forcible felony to enter my home by any means necessary and had guns on them. And I replied to it. Then I was criminally charged. But the Indiana Castle Doctrine says I'm not to be put in any legal jeopardy whatsoever for standing my ground on my property, which I had a lawful right to do. And they didn't have a lawful right to be here.
Tyra fails to recognize or accept that the castle doctrine will not protect him here because there was no imminent threat. All right, there was no threat that his life was ever in danger. He said himself that he was not home, and by the time he got home, the bounty hunters had already left. He did not hear what they said. Donna said to him that they threatened to make a forcible entry or whatever she claims to have said. And seeing as the threat had passed, if they felt like they were in some sort of danger, they were obligated to call the police, make a report on the bounty hunters, and say, these guys came by and they threatened us. Then we'd be having a completely different conversation. He would have to prove that he was threatened, which he has not done yet, but we would have a completely different conversation. What he is being charged with is a felony level 6 intimidation for what he did after the fact. He went online, waving a gun, making a bunch of threats. That falls under, if you look at line A, a threat is to commit a forcible felony. That gun is a forcible felony that he was waving in the video while making his intimidation threats. Then we also have C. The threat is communicated because of the occupation, profession, employment status, or ownership status of the person, or the threat relates to or is made in connection with the occupation, profession, employment status, or ownership status of a person. The person was a bounty hunter, and he threatened him. He threatened him that if he did his job, that he would be shot. He also included in that IMPD. He threatened that if they came to his house to do their job, they would be shot. That is why Tyra is in the position that he's currently in. To highlight his lack of understanding of the castle doctrine, I will offer you this and end on it.
Before the okay. Not that. So all this was the aircraft, about an aircraft. You clearly see it. So I'm not skipping something. You know what I mean? To get away from something. All right. Now let's continue. Notwithstanding C through E, a person is not justified in using force, whether it's just simply physical force or even deadly force. This is the section where you wouldn't be justified. Okay. Notwithstanding subsection C through E, a person is not justified in using force if the person is committing or is escaping after the commission of a crime. So if you're committing a crime or attempting to escape after committing a crime, you can't, the person that attempts to stop you from committing that crime or stop you after the commission of the crime or in the midst of you committing a crime, you cannot use force or even deadly force to get away. You can't, for instance, if you're robbing a bank and you a legal gun owner, I don't know why you would rob a bank, but this is just an example. If you robbing a bank and somebody tries to stop you from robbing that bank and you end up shooting and taking that person's life, you will be charged with first-degree murder. You can't use the stand your ground law to not be charged. You can't commit crimes and then try to use self-defense when somebody, the self-defense law or the stand your ground law, when somebody a regular citizen or a law-abiding citizen or a law enforcement officer or anybody, you cannot use physical force or deadly force and be protected under the castle doctrine because you would have been committing a crime or escaping after committing said crime. You are not protected whatsoever. See, I was in my own home.
Tyra gives an example here of a person with a gun going in and robbing a bank. And while robbing that bank, someone tries to stop them. The bank robber shoots that person. And he says that no matter what, the bank robber just committed first-degree murder. He says, by his understanding of the law and the castle doctrine, that you have no defense whatsoever if you have committed a crime and someone decides to come up and stop you. This is where his lack of legal education will eventually get him in trouble. I found an almost identical case to the scenario that he just created. And let's see how this one ended in real life.
The suspect who allegedly fatally shot a store clerk after an armed robbery at this Chevron gas station in Antioch will not be charged with murder.
When the imminent threat of harm to one's life has dissipated, the victim of a property crime under the law cannot then use deadly force to attempt to reclaim that property.
Last Saturday, Antioch police got a 911 call just after 2 a.m. about the robbery. When they arrived on scene, they found 36-year-old James Williams, who was fatally shot. But it's what Williams did before he was shot that may determine the charges filed by the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office.
The specific facts of that robbery and subsequent gunfire exemplify an important legal distinction.
The DA's office says surveillance footage shows Williams was robbed at gunpoint. The suspects took off on foot. Williams then gets a gun and chases after them. They get about 100 feet away when Williams fires first. He hit 19-year-old Ronald Jackson in the leg. Jackson allegedly returned fire, which ultimately killed Williams.
Technically, when you commit a robbery, the robbery's not over until you reach a place of safety. And the robbers hadn't at this time. But the analysis is that now they are under a deadly attack when such attack was not legally justified.
Deputy DA Derek Butt says they considered all possible scenarios, but because Williams chased after the suspects with a firearm, at that point, in the eyes of the law, it's no longer self-defense.
There's really no reasonable interpretation of these events that would suggest that Mr. Jackson, who'd been in the store, was under any sort of a threat from these individuals who are clearly running away and had gained quite a distance.
If a store clerk who had just been robbed at gunpoint can't claim self-defense against the robbers who were still in his parking lot after just robbing him, if he can't claim self-defense, how can Tyra possibly claim self-defense to a bunch of bounty hunters who had left his home hours prior? I don't know a lot about a lot, but I know the castle doctrine does not apply to this case. And unlike Tyra, I also know that the only thing that I know for certain is that I don't know everything for certain.
Listen, I understand the law, I know the law. What I did, I can do.